This is Food for Thought with Deborah Walker. On Food for Thought this week, I have therapist and ex-barrister Andrea Morrison, who's written a book called The Feel Good Factor in 30 Days. Welcome, Andrea, to Food for Thought.
Hi, Debbie.
Now, give my audience a background on how this book came about, because it actually is quite interesting, your story.
Yes, it started probably a couple of years ago when I'd qualified as a therapist. I was sharing my experiences with my clients and also kind of family and friends, and that developed into a blog which was very popular, and I was getting some really good feedback, but as is very common with a lot of blogs, I didn't keep it up, and other things got in the way. And it wasn't really until this time last year my husband had written it and self-published, and it just opened the debate as to why little nuggets of info that I had and techniques that I'd used, and I decided that perhaps a nice way to kind of put them all together would be into a book, and that's what we did.
Oh, lovely. And basically, now some people would say that someone with a career such as your own, you know, barristers, we almost think you've got it all, particularly as a woman barrister. You know, it's hard work to get to become a woman barrister. Let's face it, because it is a very masculine environment. But clearly, you hadn't got it all, and your career became all-consuming, which a lot of people experience nowadays, particularly women.
Yes, that's right, and you know, at the bar, it is a way of life. It isn't a 9-to-5 job at all. And when I was in my sort of early 30s and I just qualified, and it was my second career, so I'd worked really hard to get there. It was great, you know, and I really enjoyed it. And you know, traveling all over the country was exciting, and meeting different people and doing something that I really believed in. But it wasn't until I had my own family, and then all my priorities changed. And suddenly my job and my career wasn't as important as my family, and that's when it became very difficult for me to juggle, because I was very much torn between being there for my children, but also we had financial commitments. It was an income, and what else could I do? You know, I felt I didn't really have any choice but to continue.
Yeah, you have to ask whether some careers are worth it, don't you? Because in regards to impact they're having on health, you worked actually ridiculous hours, which is what's expected of people in the bar and in that profession in particular. You travelled continuously up and down the country, and fundamentally, like a lot of women, ended up with little time with your family.
Well, that's right, and you know, it was more and more getting squeezed, and then you end up doing really silly things like making sure that you are with your family at the times that you are there and they are there. So, you know, generally in the evenings or in the mornings, and then you're squeezing in all your work at other times when you should be resting or when you should be sleeping. So you're really burning the candle at both ends, because you're trying to accommodate all these different pulls on your life. And it just becomes impossible, really.
Yeah, and I do think that it does become impossible. And I'm seeing personally burnout on more and more levels, with more and more people coming to my clinic. The exhaustion factor is just absolutely huge. I mean, you must see this as a therapist as well.
And I think it's because there is so much pressure, financial pressure in society at the moment, that women just don't have a choice. They have to work. They have to carry on working, and so they're very much put in this position where they are effectively doing two jobs in the same amount of time.
And in many respects, that's been going on for a long time, because I know that, you know, when my mother was very much a stay-at-home mother, I'm in my middle 40s, and effectively that was kind of what was expected, but there was that transition at that point. So I do think that whole change for women has been for the last kind of 40 years.
Absolutely, and certainly when I was growing up, my mother worked. I think perhaps some of the differences is that a lot of women don't have any other family support. We don't live near our family, And so there's no one there to kind of pick the kids up if you're late from work, or just have the kids or help out with the house and things like that. And I think that puts an added strain on families, because they don't have that family network behind them that can just give them that little boost every now and again to keep them going. So that doesn't help either.
I do think that's a really interesting and important point nowadays, that actually, I was I'm almost like an economic migrant. I moved from the north of England, where there was no jobs years ago, to the south of England, so I'm actually away from my family. And fundamentally, a lot of people have become fractured in their family environments, and they would not have the support that you would naturally have from your family elders in some respects towards looking after your children and supporting that aspect of things. I do think that's a really important point in regards to why we've got such high exhaustion in women nowadays.
Absolutely, and I think it's not just the practicalities. I think it's the emotional support as well. Having your mother or your grandmother or sisters around you that have either gone through what you're going through, or who are going through it with you, so to speak. So you don't have that kind of emotional support, that way of offloading. And I do find that within my practice that it's just that female connection and that understanding of what you're doing is an impossible task. I mean, certainly when I was working, I felt quite isolated, and although it was expected that I should be able to cope with this, and the fact that I couldn't cope with it, I was somehow failing. And I think where the female network is broken down is actually, as a group, we understand that it isn't a failure if you can't do the impossible, and actually we're all in it together, and we're all finding it very difficult. And I think when women are taken out of that situation, it can be very isolating as well.
I think it's really interesting that you're calling it an impossible task, because I absolutely agree with you. When I listen to some of my clients, I'm exhausted by their life, and I'm just listening to it. Yeah,
and I think in some ways we are. I don't like to use the word conditioned, because that sounds really quite. It's quite a heavy word to use. But we are expected, there's this expectation, as soon as we have our children, there's 6 months, when you're going back to work, when you do, when you're carrying on as you did before. And I don't think perhaps we take on board what an enormous task this is. Now, I personally found it easier when my children were under 5 and were in full-time childcare than I did when they went to school. However, in my professional life, it was, when they go back to school, you'll have lots of time. Mm. And in fact, actually, I found it became more complicated when they were at school than it was when they were much smaller. And so there are these kind of misbeliefs, really, about how easy it is to look after children and run our houses and our homes. And I think that's probably partly where the issues stem from, because then women have this expectation that it's easy and that they should be able to do it, and then they find they can't do it, or they're finding it hard, and they're finding it emotionally hard and physically hard, and that's when the negativity and the doubt and I'm no good at this starts to creep in, and I think it's a very sad state of affairs, really.
And many careers and corporations are just not supporting women and the family environment in many respects. I know that I used to work in HR. Very much what we said was not really what we carried out in many ways. And I think that is just exacerbating the problem with the expectation of long hours. I remember if I walked out the office before 6 o'clock, people would say on the way out, lightweight.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, and it is part of the problem is, I think, the way that we approach this, and it's a non-acceptance of this situation. That we all have children and we all have families, and that's how the human race continues. But we don't accept that, and that when women do have, or and dads as well,
Yep.
When couples have children, their lives change, and that is not accommodated within the working environment. Now, as an employment lawyer, I know the other side is, well, the employers would say, well, why should we accommodate? Why should we bend the rules? My personal view is that we miss out on a whole load of tools because women leave jobs, they leave their careers, but they have this enormous toolkit, and that we're not making use of those, and we're not making use of those because we're just not flexible enough to accommodate it.
No.
I now, obviously, I work from home. I have an internet business as well, which I work from home, and I've kind of moulded my working life around my family. But in the internet age now, I do wonder, just actually quite a lot of work could probably be done in this way. We don't have to actually go to an office and stay there for 10, 12 hours a day. We could do it, we could work in a much different way than we do.
And this has been the rise of the mumpreneur, isn't it, basically?
Absolutely. I think there are so many of them now, and good for them. I think it's brilliant. I think it really is. I'm seeing more and more women saying, well, actually, you know what? I have this bag of skills, and I don't need to be defined by a profession. I can just use these skills in this way, and I can fit this around my family, and I think that's fantastic. And I would, encourage more and more women to do that.
Now, let's just get back to you and your kind of journey, because part of your journey was the fact that you suffered from infertility, didn't you, for a period of time?
Yes, I did. I was diagnosed with severe endometriosis when I was about 28, 29. And it's something I'd suffered from for a long time. Sorry, you were...
I was just going to say, and for me, lots of career women that I see have got infertility, and so I see that these two very much married together continuously with my practice, and I believe it is the stress that they are experiencing, and the reason it carries on for a period of time, even when they've often given up their job or they've changed their life significantly, is because it can take 5 to 7 years for the body to recover, can't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I suffered with endometriosis all my kind of adult life from sort of teenage times, but unfortunately it takes quite a long time, or it did in those days, quite a long time to diagnose and recognise. But certainly, as those people with endometriosis know, it doesn't cause infertility, but there are a lot of women who have infertility problems who also have endometriosis. And it took us probably about 4 years, and it's quite true to say that during that time I just qualified, I was training. It was very difficult to get pupillage at that time. Only 12% of women were barristers at the time when I qualified, so and when 300 tenancies available. So it wasn't a kind of chilling time for us either. No, I agree. I think, stress is a huge factor, and I, like you, see a lot of stress in my practice as well, and it's something that's certainly on the increase.
Now, you were eventually diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, and I think you were lucky to get a diagnosis, to be honest, because it's rarely recognised, I find. Lots of my clients have almost come to the end of the tether after having a number of tests done and continually being told there's nothing wrong with them because they look fine, and often they'll be told they look great, in fact. But the tests, the test, there's nothing showing up on the test, but they are absolutely exhausted, to the point where I've had people carried into my clinic. And this is on the increase, isn't it?
I believe so, yes. And I was extremely fortunate that I had a fantastic GP who just did all the normal tests and said, well, actually, looking at your history, this is what I think you've got. And I wouldn't be surprised. And I think it is on the increase because we are just expecting far too much of our bodies, and certainly in those early days of my diagnosis, and I was fortunate enough to be part of a physiotherapy group, straight after my diagnosis, it was all women, and it was all women in my kind of age group, with very similar stories. And so, I think it is on the increase, because we are just doing far too much.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It is, my practice is probably 95% women, and I don't see the men for exhaustion generally.
Yeah. And I think as well, part of the problem is that we expect too much of our bodies. I had pneumonia, and I remember it. Obviously, it's a time in my life when I do remember. I went in on the Friday, was told I had pneumonia. By the Wednesday, but was given antibiotics. By the Wednesday, I was, right. I'm back. Shall I, wear some papers? Come on, I need to get back to work. And then, and it was absolutely bonkers. I kind of expected a bit too much. So I carried on for a bit, and then, because obviously I hadn't looked after myself, at the time my son had very severe tonsillitis. I managed to catch that, and then I got another chest infection, and then eventually I said, okay then, well, we're coming up to Christmas, perhaps I'll take a couple of weeks off. And I often look back at that time and I think, well, maybe 100 years ago that would have been quite a fatal situation to be in, and equally it would have been expected that my recovery would have been a lot longer. It wouldn't have just been a dose of antibiotics and then back to work. Perhaps there was a better understanding that it takes time for your body to recover from something like that. And I think, again, it's part of the society that we live in at the moment, that we pop a pill and it's like, right then, we're back to normal, and off we go again. And you can only do that so many times before your body starts to object to it, I think.
Well, the doctor would have said years ago, you just need bed rest, effectively. And often, I work very much as an old-fashioned type of naturopath. And, when my clients say to me, I'm exhausted, all I want to do is sleep, and I'll say, well, just sleep. And they'll say, and they'll look at me, and it's almost, in fact, I did the same thing with my naturopath years ago. I was like, Gene, I don't have time to breathe, never mind sleep, don't be so ridiculous, sleeping's for the weak, and effectively, but you've got the whole, the Lemsip adverts type of thing, which are like, just take it and off you go, you're Anadin, you don't have to suffer from a headache, off you go. The underlying symptoms, just ignore them, you'll be fine. And you're absolutely right, we have just become almost, we'll ignore, I call it the dashboard of the body. We ignore our dashboard, the lights continuously come on, and if this was our car, particularly as a woman, if we hear a noise in our car, I don't know about yourself, Andrea, if I hear a noise in my car, it doesn't even have to be my car. I'm thinking, oh my God, my car's about to fall apart, I better take it to the garage, Dave, my mechanic, immediately, he makes a bomb out of me because I'm almost paranoid about my vehicle. I get a pain, or people get pains, and they just ignore the signs.
Absolutely, and I see it, again and again. Oh, well, I've had this for weeks or months, and we just ignore it because it stops us doing from what we want to do, I think we don't listen to our bodies enough, we don't, and to say to somebody, well, if you're tired, go to sleep. What, during the day? I couldn't possibly do that, and it's, no, we don't listen enough, and it's a shame, because I think a lot of these bigger problems perhaps could be either prevented or minimised if we did just take a step down and took the journey slightly slower. And perhaps expected slightly less of ourselves, and we're just kinder to ourselves. I quite often say to women, if you had a friend in your situation, or your daughter in this situation, what would you say to them? What would you do? How would you look after them? Now put yourself in that position and do the same to you, because we're not very kind to ourselves sometimes, and that has a bit of an impact.
Yeah, you're saying expect less of yourself. I always think of it, expect more of yourself in regards to looking after yourself. You need to expect that you are your most important carer.
Oh, absolutely. No, and I don't mean expect less of yourself in terms of output, but it's more in terms of you can't expect to just run a car into the ground and then drive it from John O'Groats to Land's End, but we do expect to be able to do that to our bodies. And it for me, it is about taking that time out to recharge, to look after ourselves, to repair, to do the NOT, and say, this isn't a luxury. And I think, again, with particularly with complementary therapies, and also, going to the gym and things like that, we have this kind of, it's a treat, it's a luxury, it's something outside of my normal expenditure of both time and my resources. So it's not a priority, so I won't do it. When actually it should be integral in your whole kind of well-being, and that you need to put that investment into yourself in order to ensure that you can do all the things that you want to do and that you won't burn yourself out. And it's just so very important.
Now, you made an interesting point in the book that you felt that not to be a career woman was a failure, that you'd be letting everybody else down.
Well, yes, and that was an interesting kind of emotional journey for me. When I went to the bar, I went as a mature student. I went back to university. I'd not had the most glittering of educational experiences, shall we say, when I was younger. And, my husband had given up a lot. He'd given up his job. He'd moved to the other end of the country. And I felt that was quite a big responsibility on and it was a responsibility that I put on my own shoulders. And so when I was at the bar, obviously I was the main breadwinner, we had a certain standard of living, and to stop all that, it was almost saying, well, it wasn't worth you giving up everything and moving all the way up here, and we won't have this income anymore. And it was my fault because I couldn't cope with it. And if I could cope with it, we could have carried on in that way. And, I look back now, obviously, at that thought process and think, well, that was just ridiculous. But at the time, it was, if I didn't carry on, I had let everybody down because I couldn't do what I'd set out to do. And there were other people who could do it, so why couldn't I do it? But of course, my circumstances were different to all of theirs. Mm-hmm. But I think when you're in the middle of it, you don't see that. You just see it as I failed in this way. And what I say in the book is that I wasn't, particularly, a career woman. My career wasn't the be-all and end-all. I'd gone to the bar because it was something I'd always wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And I thought it would be a life regret if I didn't give it a shot. And so it wasn't something that I was, I obviously did a very good job, and I did well, but it wasn't that I had it was a choice between my career or my children, and that was a difficult choice. My children would win hands down every day, but I did feel at the time that by not being able to manage and balance all this, that I was letting everybody down.
Do you think many women have lost sight of what's important nowadays because their work is so overwhelming? Because I feel your book and story is very much a reflection of that.
To be honest, I wouldn't like to kind of say about other women and whether they've lost sight about what's important or not. I think we all make choices that are right for ourselves and for our families. I felt very much that my priorities at that time were wrong, and I felt as though I had my hands tied behind my back and I wasn't able to reprioritise easily. Whether other women feel like that, I don't know. I wouldn't like to say, oh, women have lost sight of what's important, because I think every woman does what they feel is right for their family, and I think it's a very individual thing. So I found that I personally had not lost sight. I knew what was important. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't prioritise it in the right way because of the situation that I was in.
Now, for me, what was most interesting as well about your book is that, and what I see happening with my clients is that the body just stops you from carrying on. So if you won't listen to the lights coming on effectively on the dashboard, then eventually the body will just go, that's it, I can't do anymore. So it actually stops you. And you said, basically at that point it allowed you to be the person you wanted to be. I just thought was really interesting insight, because finally it almost gave you the reason to actually allow yourself to do that.
Oh, absolutely. It was like the greatest excuse ever. Because there was no expectation. I think, certainly like when I had the pneumonia, it's like, well, when are you coming back to work? You can't just go back to work when you've got ME. It's, oh, right, you're going to need some decent time off then. Yes. So it was a really good opportunity for me to really rethink things, because finally I had this space. I had space to heal emotionally, physically, and be first and foremost the mum that I wanted to be, and be a part of my kids' lives. Do silly things like go to sports day, see their plays and things like, let them have their friends around for tea. Really kind of quite basic things. But for them, that was really important. And before, that was something I couldn't do. And so having the ME allowed me to do all those things, which was brilliant on one hand, not so brilliant in that I wasn't feeling that great at the time, but it did allow me to have that space.
Now, what was the journey you actually took to changing things for yourself in regards to the specific things that you did to alter this whole fatigue situation? I know the book's part of a reflection of that, but is that the whole reflection of what you did? No, because I think the journey was a lot more complex, and I don't think you can really put it into sort of 30 little snippets. I think the book was very much about the little techniques that I used to get me through each day, just little things that I used to do. The journey was a lot longer in that, as I say in the book, it was a bit like an onion with many, many layers, and I had to unpeel each one, because what became very apparent was that I had experienced so many different things over the previous 10 years, starting with the infertility, that because that period was very kind of fast and furious, I never really had a chance to properly sort of digest it and kind of leave it in the past. So what was happening was I was very much living my past in my present. And I talk about using different things like neuro-linguistic programming and hypnotherapy, and I worked with various practitioners to really move on from that, which was, enormously helpful. And I think that was a big part, because my personal experience of ME, and again, I believe that ME is very personal, and those that I've worked with and who've been in my life with ME, it is very different, and it manifests very differently in every person, and its causes are very different. Mine, a lot were manifested in that emotional side. I think on some level I was willing myself to stop, and so I did. And so I had to deal with the reasons why I wanted to stop. And once I dealt with those reasons, I was able to start again, if that makes sense. Yeah.
And one of those big decisions was my decision not to, in the near or not so near future, to go back to being a barrister and having that practice again and having that lifestyle, because I needed to know that I couldn't easily just go back to that way of life. I very much wanted a different way of life. And that was probably the final kind of box that was ticked. So it was a very personal journey that I went through. And a lot of that journey was actually listening to myself. I mean, we've already talked about listening to your body and listening to what your body is telling you, but also for me, just relying on myself and making decisions that were right for me. And that again was an important part of that journey.
Really interesting about listening to yourself and allowing that intuition to actually happen.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people lose sight of that, and we do get on this hamster wheel, and actually we stop making decisions and we stop making choices. We just get carried along with the tide, and partly because we don't have a choice. We can't get off. We have mortgages to pay and bills to pay, and and all manner of different things, and we are in this kind of this hole where we just can't get ourselves out of. But for me, I mean, I feel like I was one of the lucky ones. I was able to get off, and it has been very much about, well, what do I think is right? What decision do I think is right? Right, well, we'll do that then. So that's been a big part of it.
I also find with myself, I had ME years ago, so I have a lot of empathy. But which is why I was interested in talking to you, to be honest, because I wanted to talk to somebody else who'd experienced it. What I found is that with myself and with my clients, procrastination around decision making tends to happen more and more, because they can't listen to their intuition. They're overwhelmed already, so fundamentally they struggle to make any decision, never mind one decision.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think partly that's what some of the kind of the lessons, as I called them very loosely, in the book was about getting that motivation back. Because you do feel really overwhelmed, and I do recall at times when it was just all too much. Especially in those early days of ME. And I think as well, partly it's fear of getting things wrong. That you're going to make the wrong decision, no matter how small it is. And it's getting all that back into perspective as well.
I found it interesting when you just said earlier about the physical side versus the emotional side. I find that the physical side is often easier to deal with, and people can put lots of things in place. The emotional side is the one that takes the longest and seems to be the biggest mountains that people have to climb. Did you find the same thing?
Oh, absolutely. And it was the emotional side that I really kind of tackled first. But that was a personal thing. That was a kind of my intuition telling me you need to deal with this and then deal with the physical, because to me it felt like it was all linked together. But it was hard because it was changing a whole mindset. I had constructed whole belief structures that I needed to change, and that's not easy. And I think, perhaps I've also found, and I mean, this isn't, always right, but those that I've come across with ME are quite highly motivated, capable people. They're people who can do a lot. And I suppose you could say the doers of society. And I think that's partly the problem is that they do too much, and so their expectations are so much higher than everybody else's, and then when they can't meet them, they become completely overwhelmed, and then you become demotivated, and then you can't do anything. And for me personally, that was something that I had to work on, and I had to adjust my internal mechanisms to accommodate that.
It is fascinating, isn't it, when you probably like me take a really long case history, and fundamentally, these people aren't lazy people by any stretch of the imagination. They have high expectations, and they're normally able to achieve things, which is what makes it even harder for them, having no energy.
Absolutely, because you're just not content with doing nothing, and that's and I still kind of struggle with that now. And I think it's a love of life. You just want to get out there. You want to experience everything you could possibly experience. But there is a limit. There's a limit to what you can realistically achieve. And certainly with me, we had 3 children in 3 years, and when I stopped practicing, my eldest was 5, and it was when I look back now, I think, my goodness, it was slightly bonkers in thinking that I could possibly manage all of that. And then, in the midst of it, we said, actually, we need to build an extension. I could just bring it on. We'll do that as well. And I think that is quite a common trait, I think, with people with ME, that they just kind of, bring it on, that's fine, we'll do that too. You're right when you say that actually during the period of recovery, that feeling of doing nothing has a much bigger impact and almost becomes more overwhelming than the idea of doing lots in many respects.
Yeah, and I wonder whether, when you talk about those 5 years, I feel overwhelmed just listening to you. But in all honesty, you say about how you became depersonalised over the previous 10 years before you changed things. And I'm wondering whether, because I see this a lot in my clients and myself, that almost you distance yourself from what you're doing, and therefore you don't feel it. You don't feel the overwhelm in the end. You just get on, and you're just almost ploughing through it. It's like a huge to-do list, and like a robot, you can carry on.
Yeah, absolutely. And you don't make this conscious decision, I'm not going to do anything for myself. You just simply don't have time. You don't have time to pick up a book or go and have a look in the shop that you want to go and look in. But it's making those priorities, and it's making it a priority and saying, actually, no, I need to do this. This is important. And certainly, when I had my eldest daughter, and those 5 years going on, I was at the bottom of the pile as well, and my husband would say the same as well. We didn't do anything for ourselves because we were just busy keeping afloat, just we often talk about it, it's like pushing back a tide. You're just constantly trying to keep going on the day-to-day, and you forget that actually you need to do these things. You need to schedule time in when you recharge, that you be yourself, that you do things that you enjoy doing, because otherwise you just become, as you say, depersonalised. I don't think I was particularly unusual in that.
No, I don't think you were at all. And your book completely struck a chord, and your story completely struck a chord, not only with myself, but actually with how I see a number of my female clients showing up with exactly the same exhaustion picture. Now, your book is effectively a series of day lessons to help someone re-achieve kind of feeling good again, which I just really, really loved. It reminded me of kind of the Louisa Hay, a page at a time books. And I thought it was a lovely way of kind of reminding you to do something each day, to effectively, I call it wagging your tail, I have to say, to find the joy again in life.
Well, that's right, and just live a little bit. We forget to live, we forget to smile, we're here to enjoy ourselves fundamentally. It shouldn't be a grind all of the time. And when I thought about writing a book, what I wanted was a kind of pick up and dip in book. And I didn't want anything too heavy. I didn't want to talk about the why it works, because I thought actually when I was in that midst of, those 5 years, I wasn't really interested in that. I just wanted to be told what to do. And so I wanted a bit that you could either just have quickly on your Kindle, or you could have in your handbag, and that moment when you're on the bus or, on the train, you could just have a quick, oh yeah, I'll do that today, that was good, and then pop it back in again. Just to have a little injection, really.
Perfect. Now, you start off by basically asking people to make a decision right from the word go about being happy and positive. I thought it was a really interesting thing to say, actually, because you make the point that it will be an effort, and in our society nowadays, it is actually an effort, because with many people and the media, it is quite negative, and therefore to be happy and positive, you do stand out, I have to say.
I do. In fact, I had quite an interesting conversation with somebody the other day. He just said, I find happy people really weird.
Yeah.
It really struck with me. That was quite an unusual thing to say. And I think it's because we aren't happy as a society. No. We focus very much on the negative. If somebody's happy or they're successful, we like nothing better than to say, oh, why is she so happy? Oh, she's not so good at this, or she's not so good at that. We don't like to kind of feel that other people can be successful or happy. We don't like to celebrate that. We're much more of the kind of moany variety. And you switch on the news, you switch on television in the evening, and it's all very kind of dark and grey, and I don't particularly feel motivated after an evening of watching telly, unless it's something quite a comedy or something like that. And so for me personally, it was very much about making that decision, making that positive choice, that I was going to not allow external things to detract me from my personal journey of being more positive and more happy. Because it is really hard, because after about 15 minutes you think, oh, this just isn't working. The car won't start, the bus is late, everybody's moaning, I've gone to work, this has happened, and it's just very difficult. And you have to, in every situation, say no. That there's I'm not going to look at this in the same way as I did before. And yeah, it's not easy.
And it is about turning it on its head, isn't it? And saying, even in the worst of times, that actually I can still be happy and I can still be optimistic and positive about how I will resolve this, I will move things forward and things like that, isn't it? Absolutely.
I mean, there are people out there who are facing at the moment dreadful challenges, and obviously I'm not talking about those kinds of situations. I'm talking about the kind of day-to-day that we find, every day. It's trying to find for example, trying to find a positive in the fact your car won't start in the morning, and you're late for work, and you've got a meeting at 9, and it's all really stressful. And it's about taking that step back and going, right, okay, I need to deal with this situation. I'll ring work. There's nothing I can do. I can't get there. It is just one of those things. I'm going to have to sort it out. I'll have to face the consequences. Right, I'll go make myself a nice coffee. May as well. I'm at home. Let's enjoy it. No kids at school. It's nice and quiet. Actually, there's a silver lining to this cloud already. Or maybe if you're stuck in a traffic jam, again, there's nothing you can do. Beeping your horn and getting hot under your collar is not going to change that situation. It's not going to make it miraculously disappear. However, thinking, right, well, I'm stuck here. Oh, I've got that CD I could just listen to, or I'll listen to the radio show that I always mean to listen to and never do. I'll stick it on now. Left 10 minutes. Again, no kids in the car. I'm on my own. This is blissful. And it's just about trying to look at things slightly differently. So yeah, but as I say, not an easy thing to do.
And you point out simple things in the book, though, like smiling. I attempt to have a smile on my face all the time, but like you say, people do think I'm odd, and people will do a double take. I have to. They do. People will stare at me, and other half will say, "That's because you're smiling at everybody. Can you stop it?"
I know. People think you're on some kind of, happy drug or
vaguely unhinged, which possibly people would agree with.
But I'm quite happy with them thinking that. It's probably true. But it is. I mean, smiling is just infectious. And, it is lovely when you're interacting with just everyday people. It doesn't have to be a big thing, You can be in Tesco or wherever, doing your weekly shop, and just to interact with another human being and just to smile and lighten their day as well. It's nice for them, but it's nice for you too. So many of us just go around grunting, and and it just makes the world a nicer place to live in. And also, just imagine if everybody did that, if everybody smiled. I kind of think that maybe what we are faced with on a day-to-day, all the cars not starting and things like that, and the world would just be a much nicer place.
There's actually serious science behind smiling anyway, isn't there, around the endorphin factor and changing the whole neurotransmitter picture. So fundamentally, by actively concentrating and focusing on feeling better about things and focusing on the positive side and actually changing your physiology, it is shown that fundamentally you can change much more than your physiology. And the therapist who I'm trying to think of the name of the therapist who basically used laughter. It's gone out of my head, the name, but there was a therapist, it was a doctor years ago, and he basically used laughter with his clients, and he healed himself and he healed his clients. And so it actually has a fundamental approach on the body.
Well, of course it does, and it stands to reason, because when you laugh, your stress responses switch off. And we were talking earlier about the terrible effect that stress has on our body. I'm a firm believer that we're not designed to be under 24 hours of continual stress. We're designed to fight saber-toothed tigers. I don't know how many saber-toothed tigers the average stone-age man came across, but I'm sure he didn't live with them. And fundamentally, that's what we are doing today. We are constantly surrounded by saber-toothed tigers that cause us all this stress. We're not physically designed for it. And so by injecting a bit of laughter, a bit of silliness or whatever, smiling, has a physical effect. It helps switch those stress responses off and gives our adrenal glands a rest. Certainly, I talk about, having ME, which is, what my diagnosis was. But when I've looked into it further and read different papers and things, there's also something called adrenal fatigue, which seems to have very similar sort of symptoms. And, I will never know which one it was I had because, of course, there's not a particular blood test that you can take and they say, right, you have this. But certainly my body had been working under huge amounts of stress. My adrenal glands were probably working overtime over a very long, sustained period. Of course they were fatigued. It stands to reason. And, of course, as soon as your adrenal glands become fatigued, they don't work properly. And you actually need adrenaline to do everything you do day to day. That's what gives you that kind of kick to get going. So, we have to switch them off. We have to look after them. And so actually by having a bit of fun, being a bit silly, smiling, doing silly things like I say in the book, like having a disco in the kitchen with your kids, it's the light-hearted element of the way that we live, and we neglect it. And really that needs to be kind of brought back into the fore, but that's what I think anyway.
And you talk about making life interesting as well, because I do feel that that's a really good point to make, that many people, their lives are so busy and they tend to book amazing holidays at breaks, or they'll go on a spa break, but actually they don't make day-to-day life interesting for themselves.
No, that's right. And I just find it enriches my life no end when I make that time. And I talk about it in the book. One of the first books I picked up in about 6 years was a book about Queen Victoria's Vogue gene, and that she allegedly had or whatever. But it was so interesting. It was fascinating to read about sort of haemophilia and the impact that it had, and all of that, and totally absorbing. But it struck me at the time that was the first time I read anything that was non-work related and non-child related for a very, very long time. And it just, it was interesting to talk about as well.
Yeah.
I then wasn't moaning about things. I was talking about something that was really interesting. Which of course then has an impact on your relationships, your relationships with friends, and your partner as well, because you're not just moaning about your situation. And so I do, make sure that we do have this kind of different things to think about, and we do different things and explore different things, because I think it's important. And one thing that my parents always said to me, and obviously as a child I never listened, was, never stop learning. There's so much out there to learn, different things, and you must never stop learning. And I think that's important, because it again, that helps you enrich your life as well. So you kind of get things into more perspective.
Now, what's your advice for someone who is so totally physically exhausted that if you ask them what do they enjoy, they actually can't think of anything they'd want to do because they're so physically exhausted, and they just want to sleep? So what's your advice about the first steps that they should be taking, do you think?
Be kind to yourself. That would be my first advice, was to just quite simply be kind to yourself. Stop beating yourself up, because that's generally what I find. It doesn't matter. The fact that you're there, you can't do anything, you're so exhausted, that's fine. Accept where you are today and just be kind to yourself. Nurture yourself. Look after yourself. And if anything is a priority, it's you. Because certainly in my experience, when I was in that place, I was so busy beating myself up for getting me in that place that I actually didn't want to look after myself at all. And the first step from my recovery was to say, okay, it's happened, we're here, but now I need to look after myself. So just, give yourself a bit of a break. It's okay.
And it is okay, isn't it?
Of course it is. Of course it is. Nobody asks to be in that position. We don't set out to end up like that. But I do think we need to perhaps get away from this idea that it is a failure, that we've broken down. You had a breakdown. It's no. We need to get away from all these negative things. It's okay, and life will get better if you want it to, and but we start making some positive steps, but being kind to yourself and getting yourself right.
Andrea, this has been a lovely interview today, I have to say. Thank you for coming on Food for Thought and talking about not only ME and chronic fatigue syndrome, but your journey through your life, which you've been very open about, and I appreciate that. And talking about your book, do you want to just tell people how people can get in contact with you to either work with you or how they find your book?
Yes, my book is on Amazon, and it's available as a Kindle or a download, and so yeah, that's where the book is. And yeah, if anybody would like to work with me, obviously as I said before, I'm a therapist, so I do clinical reflexology, which is my kind of chosen therapy, but I also do life coaching as well, and they can contact me through Eden House Holistic, which is based in York, and there's a website as well.
Today I've been speaking to Andrea Morrison, who's written The Feel Good Factor in 30 Days. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me.